Under the eternal stars that had guided humanity since the beginning of time, Mesopotamian families had slept peacefully in their ancient cities, finding meaning in the daily rhythms of work and family that sustained urban civilization. But from these ordinary experiences of love and loss, friendship and betrayal, hope and despair, emerged something extraordinary. Stories that transformed personal struggles into universal truths. Literature that would speak across millennia to every generation, that wondered about the meaning of human existence. The storyteller's voice rose and fell like music in the evening air, as families gathered in the courtyard of ancient Uruk, 4,000 years before Christ. The oil lamps that flickered around the circle cast dancing shadows on faces intent with concentration, as the old man recounted the tale that had been refined through countless tellings. The epic of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, whose quest for immortality had become humanity's first great meditation on what it means to be human. "Listen," the storyteller began, his voice carrying the authority of generations who had preserved these words in memory before they were captured in cuneiform script. "Listen to the story of he who saw everything, who experienced all emotions, who learned the secret that is hidden. Gilgamesh, who was 2/3 God and 1/3 human, whose heart contained all the joys and sorrows that mortals must bear." The audience that gathered to hear this tale included children who would carry it forward to their own families, adults who found in Gilgamesh's struggles reflections of their own experiences, and elders who had lived long enough to understand the profound truths embedded in what appeared to be simple adventure stories. This was literature in its purest form, words that transformed individual experience into shared wisdom. The epic itself had evolved over centuries from historical memories of an actual king who had ruled Uruk around 2700 before Christ. But the power of the story lay not in its historical accuracy, but in its exploration of themes that resonated with every human heart. The search for meaning in a world where death seemed to negate all achievement. The tension between civilization and nature. The complex relationships between friendship and duty, love and power. Gilgamesh, as the storytellers portrayed him, embodied both the possibilities and limitations of human nature. His great strength and divine heritage enabled achievements that ordinary mortals could never accomplish, yet his mortality made all his victories temporary. His friendship with Enkidu, the wild man who became his closest companion, demonstrated love's power to transform both civilization and wilderness, yet their separation through death revealed love's ultimate fragility. The story's most profound moments came not from battles with monsters or supernatural adventures, but from quiet scenes where characters confronted the fundamental questions that every human being must face. When Enkidu lay dying, his reflections on the value of civilized life versus natural existence spoke to the eternal tension between human ambition and acceptance of natural limits. When Gilgamesh mourned his friend's death, his grief expressed the universal experience of loss that no amount of power or wisdom could prevent. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of the Epic of Gilgamesh was its conclusion, not the triumphant victory that earlier heroic traditions typically provided, but a mature acceptance of human limitations combined with recognition that mortal achievements could possess their own form of immortality. Gilgamesh's quest for eternal life failed, but the city he built, the friendships he cherished, and the wisdom he gained through suffering created a legacy that transcended physical death. This philosophical sophistication reflected the intellectual environment of Mesopotamian cities, where scribes, priests, and scholars had centuries to refine their understanding of human nature and cosmic purpose. The literature they created was not primitive mythology, but sophisticated exploration of questions that remain central to human experience. The relationship between individual desires and social responsibilities, the proper response to inevitable mortality, the sources of meaning in existence that appears chaotic and unpredictable. The goddess Inanna's descent to the underworld, another central myth of Mesopotamian literature, explored themes of death and renewal that connected personal experience to cosmic cycles. Inanna's journey through the 7 gates of the underworld, where she was stripped of power and regalia until she faced death in naked vulnerability, represented every individual's confrontation with forces beyond human control. Her resurrection and return to the world above ground was not simple happy ending, but complex meditation on the relationship between death and life, loss and recovery, despair and hope. The price of her return, the substitution of her beloved Dumuzi to take her place in the realm of death, acknowledged that renewal often requires sacrifice, that growth may demand the surrender of what we most wish to preserve. These mythological narratives were preserved and transmitted through the cuneiform writing system that enabled unprecedented precision in literary expression. Unlike oral traditions that changed with each telling, written literature could preserve exact words that authors had chosen to convey specific meanings and emotional effects. This technological capability enabled the development of sophisticated literary techniques that enhanced storytelling's power to convey complex ideas and emotions. The poetry that emerged from this literate environment demonstrated remarkable artistic achievement that combined emotional power with intellectual depth. Enheduanna, the world's first known author, created hymns and poems that celebrated both divine majesty and human dignity, while exploring the relationships between cosmic order and earthly justice. Her poetry to Inanna combined personal devotion with theological sophistication, creating literature that functioned simultaneously as religious expression, political statement, and artistic achievement. Her position as high priestess of the moon god Inanna, while serving as daughter of the Akkadian emperor Sargon, enabled her to synthesize Sumerian and Akkadian literary traditions into new forms that influenced subsequent poetry throughout Mesopotamian civilization. The wisdom literature that developed alongside these epic and mythological works addressed practical questions about how to live well in complex urban societies. Proverbs, instructions, and philosophical dialogues preserved insights about human nature, social relationships, and ethical behavior that had been discovered through generations of urban experience. These texts dealt with questions that remain relevant to contemporary readers. How should individuals balance personal ambition with family responsibilities? What constitutes justice in relationships between people of different social status? How can communities maintain stability while accommodating change? What attitudes toward mortality enable full engagement with life, rather than paralyzing fear of death? The legal literature that had begun with Hammurabi's Code evolved into sophisticated exploration of principles that could guide judicial decisions in cases where written law provided insufficient guidance. These texts demonstrated understanding that justice required not just mechanical application of rules, but wisdom that could adapt general principles to specific circumstances while maintaining consistency and fairness. The historical literature that preserved memories of kings, wars, and cultural achievements created the world's first attempts at systematic historiography, efforts to understand the patterns that governed political success and failure, the factors that enabled some civilizations to flourish while others declined, the lessons that contemporary leaders could learn from studying the experiences of their predecessors. These historical works were not mere chronicles of events, but analytical investigations that sought to identify the principles underlying political and social change. They explored questions about the relationship between divine will and human agency, the role of individual leadership in shaping collective destiny, and the factors that determined whether innovations would be preserved or lost as civilizations evolved. The religious literature that emerged from temple schools created systematic theologies that addressed fundamental questions about the nature of divine authority, the purpose of human existence, and the proper relationships between mortals and gods. These texts moved beyond simple ritual instructions to explore complex philosophical questions about suffering, justice, divine providence, and human responsibility. The creation myths that explained how the world had come into existence and why it possessed its current characteristics represented sophisticated attempts to understand the relationship between order and chaos, purpose and accident, divine planning and natural development. These narratives provided frameworks for understanding individual experience within cosmic contexts that gave meaning to both achievements and sufferings. But perhaps most remarkably, Mesopotamian literature created the precedents and techniques that would influence all subsequent literary traditions. The Epic of Gilgamesh established patterns for heroic literature that would be adapted by Greek, Roman, and later European writers. The love poetry associated with Inanna provided models for romantic literature throughout the ancient world. The wisdom traditions preserved in cuneiform texts influenced philosophical thinking from Egypt to India. As evening gatherings concluded and families prepared for sleep throughout the cities of Mesopotamia, the stories they had heard and told became part of their own life experiences, providing comfort and understanding in a vast and unpredictable world. The literature that had emerged from their civilization offered not escapism, but engagement, narratives that helped people understand their own experiences, while connecting individual lives to larger patterns of meaning. In the quiet chambers where scribes continued to copy and preserve these literary works, where students learned to read the wedge-shaped characters that captured human thoughts across time, where poets composed new works that built upon ancient foundations while speaking to contemporary concerns, the intellectual achievement of Mesopotamian civilization continued to grow and evolve. Under the same stars that had inspired the first stories of gods and heroes, the people of ancient cities rested peacefully, their dreams enriched by narratives that transformed ordinary experience into eternal wisdom. The literature they had created would outlast their political empires, their urban centers, and their technological innovations to speak across millennia to every generation that wondered about love and death, friendship and duty, the meaning of human existence in a universe both beautiful and terrible. Tomorrow would bring new stories, new insights, and new attempts to capture in words the experiences that made life meaningful despite its inevitable sorrows. But tonight, in the shadow of ziggurats where the first great stories had been told and retold until they achieved immortal form, humanity's literary heritage stood complete, a treasure of wisdom that would enrich human understanding until the end of time. Our journey through the corridors of time nears its end, as we discover how the physical remains of Mesopotamian civilization were lost and found again, speaking across thousands of years of silence to reveal their secrets to modern archaeology. The final chapter of rediscovery awaits.